Hello, and welcome to The Little Prince, Lesson 3. And today we meet a very important and central character to the book and to the author's life, the rose. Antonie de Saint-Exupéry was married to a woman named Consuelo, and she was the inspiration for the rose and somewhat the whole book. She was his muse. And yet, their marriage was very stormy, very difficult. He couldn't live with her and he couldn't live without her. It's a heartbreaking tale, just like The Little Prince is a heartbreaking book. The Little Prince is very much the story of Antonie de Saint-Exupéry's relationship with his wife Consuelo, who is the rose. Let's take a look. Chapter 8. I soon learned to know this flower better. Remember, this is the pilot speaking of his memory of what the little prince said to him. And the little prince talked about the rose. So the pilot got to know the rose better, became acquainted with her. On the little prince's planet, the flowers had always been very simple. They had only one ring of petals. They took up no room at all. They were trouble to nobody. So there were flowers on the little prince's planet, but they were little simple weeds, little daisies, not moving or spectacular, just ordinary little flowers. One morning they would appear, and by night they would have faded peacefully away. But then, from a seed blown in from God knows where, one day, a different kind of plant began to grow. The little prince watched it carefully. We say, eyes on you, eyes on you. He watched it because it could have been a new kind of baobab, something bad in his life that he had to get rid of. But pretty soon it stopped growing tall and produced a bud. A huge bud. And the little prince felt that something miraculous was about to happen. Now, it says that the flower was not satisfied to complete her preparation privately behind her green leaves. No, she chose her colors carefully, and you get the picture of a woman in front of a mirror doing lipstick and curling her hair and putting on makeup just so. And then, exactly at sunrise, she opened her petals and displayed her beauty that she had worked on for days. Days she had been primping and curling and coloring and preparing. And then she bloomed exactly at sunrise. And what did she say? She said, oh, excuse me, my petals are disarranged. I just woke up. But really, she had been preparing for days to make a dazzling entry, and she revealed herself at the moment of sunrise. So the little prince knew that she was vain and false, coquettish, flirtatious, but not very deep, not very real. But she was spectacularly beautiful, and he was in awe of her beauty. And the first thing she did was ask him to give her some breakfast, to use his watering can to water water her. And she made it seem like he was remiss for not doing it sooner, that he should have watered her petals earlier. So he was like, oh, I'm so sorry, I should have done it sooner. So, let's see. Bottom of page 26. She began quickly to torment him with her vanity, which was, if truth be known, a little difficult to deal with. So she was a difficult personality. One day, for instance, when she was speaking of her 4 thorns, you know how a rose has thorns, and if you prick them, you hurt your finger? She has 4 of these thorns. So she shows her 4 thorns and says, "Let the tigers come. I am not afraid of them. I have my claws." And he says, "There are no tigers. And anyway, tigers do not eat weeds." See, he insulted her. He minimized her. In her pride, she lifted herself up, and he just put her down. There are no tigers, and tigers don't eat weeds. "I am not a weed," the flower replied sweetly. "Oh, please excuse me." The little prince was always polite. "And I am not at all afraid of tigers," she said. "But I have a horror of drafts." Drafts is when the wind blows, like a little breeze, and you can catch a cold. "So I have a horror of drafts. I don't suppose you have a screen." So he had to go get and put a screen up, so if a breeze came, she wouldn't catch a cold and die. "At night, I want you to put me under a glass globe. It is very cold where you live, and in the place where I come from." But she interrupted herself at that point, because she had come to his planet as a seed, so she never experienced another world, and she was very embarrassed that she almost told a naive untruth. In your PDF at the bottom of page 27, there's a misprint. The word "on the verge of such a," naive is the word. N-A-I-V-E, naive. And it means a little foolish and a little innocent. Like you don't know any better, you're young and silly. So she was embarrassed to be caught in a bit of a lie, saying, "Where I come from, it was very warm." That would have been a lie, because she didn't remember where she came from. So she was embarrassed, and she began to cough, saying, "What about that screen?" And the little prince said, "I was just going to get it when you stopped me." And she coughed again in order to put him in the wrong, so that he would suffer from remorse. So the little prince, in spite of all the good that was inseparable from his love, had soon come to doubt her. He had taken seriously words which were without importance, and it made him very unhappy. See, she was manipulative and silly and shallow. I ought not to have listened to her. I should not have. I shouldn't have. He confided to me one day. That means he told me. One never ought to listen to flowers. One should simply look at them and breathe their fragrance. Mine perfumed all my planet, but I did not know how to take pleasure in all her grace. This tale of the claws, which disturbed me so much, should only have filled my heart with tenderness and pity. He's saying he should not have listened to what she said. He should have enjoyed her for what she did. She was beautiful. She was fragrant. She cast her radiance about. He should have just ignored what she said. And when she showed her claws to make herself seem important, he should have felt a loving, affectionate pity for such a weak, fragile creature, claiming to be tough when really she's so fragile. Fragile means easily hurt, easily destroyed. Last paragraph on 28. The fact is that I did not know how to understand anything. I ought to have judged by deeds and not... Excuse me. Hold on one sec. I think I may be allergic to something. The fact is that I did not know how to understand anything. I ought to have judged by deeds and not by words. She cast her fragrance and her radiance over me. I ought never to have run away from her. I ought to have guessed all the affection that lay behind her poor little stratagems. Flowers are so inconsistent, but I was too young to know how to love her. He could not see that she loved him because she was mean to him. She would pretend to become sick in order to make him feel bad. She would say things that weren't true. He didn't know how to simply appreciate her beauty and her fragrance and her grace and radiance. He didn't know how to appreciate that. He felt he had to listen, and that made him unhappy. So he ran away from her. Chapter 9, the little prince leaves his planet. I believe that for his escape, he took advantage of the migration of a flock of wild birds. I think it's interesting that he calls it his escape. It's not like he wanted to go somewhere else. It's that he wanted to get away from this flower that was bothering him and hurting him. He fled away from her, not toward something better. So he took advantage of the migration of a flock of wild birds. Took advantage of means to seize an opportunity that happens to come by chance. And you take the opportunity. On the morning of his departure, he put his planet in perfect order. He carefully cleaned out his active volcanoes, the ones that are hot. He possessed 2 active volcanoes, and they were very convenient for heating his breakfast in the morning. He also had 1 volcano that was extinct. But, as he said, one never knows. Maybe it would come alive again. Maybe it was not really extinct. So he cleaned out the extinct volcano too. If they are well cleaned out, volcanoes burn slowly and steadily without any eruptions. Volcanic eruptions are like fires in a chimney. Fires happen in chimneys when they are not cleaned out, and the debris, the extra stuff that flies up sticks in there and catches fire. So you have to clean them out. On our Earth, we are obviously much too small to clean out our volcanoes. That is why they bring no end of trouble to us. The little prince also pulled up with a certain sense of dejection, that's sadness. The last little shoots of the baobabs. He believed that he would never want to return. But on this last morning, all these familiar tasks seemed very precious to him. I wonder if the baobabs, pulling up the baobabs, represents him doing all the little things that maintain his relationship with his wife. Maybe bringing her coffee in bed, or smoothing over her ill temper, or agreeing with her silly statements. All these things he has to do in order to keep her from becoming offended, like a baobab growing to break up his planet. He believed he would never want to return, but on this last morning, all these familiar tasks seemed very precious. And when he watered the flower for the last time and prepared to place her under the shelter of her glass globe, he realized he was very close to tears. So he's leaving the flower he loves. "Goodbye," he said to the flower, but she made no answer. She probably doesn't want him to go. "Goodbye," he said again. The flower coughed, but it was not because she had a cold. "I've been silly," she said to him at last. "I ask your forgiveness. Try to be happy." He was surprised by this absence of reproaches. No reproaches. Reproaches is, you did this and you did that, and right now she's not doing that. She's saying, "I've been silly. Try to be happy." He was surprised by this absence of reproaches. He stood there all bewildered. The glass globe held arrested in midair. Remember, I told you arrested. Oh, I think I told this to the other class. It means to be stopped. Just stop. So the globe was arrested in midair. He did not understand this quiet sweetness. "Of course I love you," the flower said to him. "It is my fault you have not known it all the while. That is of no importance. But you have been just as foolish as I. Try to be happy. Let the glass globe be. I don't want it anymore." "But the wind, my cold is not so bad as all that. The cool night air will do me good. I am a flower." "But the animals?" "Well, I must endure the presence of 2 or 3 caterpillars if I wish to become acquainted with the butterflies. It seems they are very beautiful. And if not the butterflies and the caterpillars, who will call upon me? You will be far away." She's going to be lonely. "And as for the large animals, I am not at all afraid of any of them. I have my claws." She's still the same. She believes in herself. And again, the word is naively. Naively, she showed her 4 thorns. Then she added, "Don't linger like this. You've decided to go away. Now go!" For she didn't want him to see her crying. She was such a proud flower. I think he left because he didn't think she loved him. Her behavior of made him think he wasn't loved. And also the foolish, false things she said. But she did love him. Chapter 10. And this is our last chapter for tonight. The little prince visits the king. Now we begin a series of visits to different kinds of grown-ups. This is a theme in the book. Grown-ups versus children. Grown-ups are people who are adult, grown up, but they're also people who have certain narrow ways of looking at the world. And children who look with the heart understand things better than grown-ups who they narrow their vision to one thing and they become foolish and ridiculous. So this is the first of the visits to a type of grown-up, a king. He found himself in the neighborhood, that means close by, of asteroids 325 through 330. He began, therefore, by visiting them in order to add to his knowledge. So he's trying to learn. The first was inhabited by a king. And as you can see, the planet is just as small as the little prince's planet. And there's only room for the king and his robe. Clad in royal ermine and purple, clad means dressed. He was seated upon a throne which was at the same time both simple and majestic. I like that. Simple, but majestic. That's good. Here is a subject. A subject is a person who must obey the king. Kind of like a citizen to the president. And the prince asked, how could he recognize me? But he didn't realize that the world is simplified for kings. Everybody is a subject. Everybody has to obey them. Approach me so that I may see you better, said the king, who was proud that now he could be in charge of somebody. The little prince looked everywhere to find a place to sit down, but the king's robe was everywhere, so he had to stay standing, and he yawned. And the king says, don't yawn in the presence of a king. It's contrary to etiquette. I forbid you to do so. So the little prince isn't allowed to yawn. But he says, I can't help it. I can't stop myself. He was very embarrassed. Said the king, then I order you to yawn. It's been a long time since anyone yawned in my presence. Yawn right now. And then the little prince was afraid, and he couldn't. So the king adjusted his order. He said, so I order you to yawn sometimes and other times don't yawn. Which is, of course, what everyone does. He seemed vexed. That means a little irritated. For what the king wanted was to be obeyed. But because he was good, he made his orders reasonable. He told the little prince, if I ordered a general to fly like a bird, and he didn't do it, whose fault would it be? His or mine? He says it would be my fault for giving an unreasonable and impossible order. So what this king does is he orders everything to do what it would naturally do anyway. And that way he feels he is being obeyed because his orders are reasonable. That's what he says. The little prince asked him, what do you rule over? And he says, I rule over everything. Everything. So the little prince asks, well, if you rule over all the stars and suns and planets, will you command the sun to set right now so we can watch a sunset? And the king says, not till tonight at a certain point in time when sunset is scheduled. That would be the time when conditions are favorable. So the king really cannot give an order anytime he wants for something to happen. He has to wait until conditions are favorable, meaning the thing is about to happen anyway. So the little prince decides to go away. He's learned enough from the king, but he doesn't want to hurt the king's feelings. So he says, "Sire, why don't you order me to leave? It seems the conditions are favorable." But the king doesn't want him to go. He says, "I'll make you a minister." "A minister of what?" "Minister of justice." And the little prince says, "But who am I to judge? There's nobody here." And the king says, "You'll have to judge yourself. That is the hardest thing of all, to judge yourself." And he says, "We have an old rat who lives in this planet somewhere. Every now and again you can judge him and sentence him to death. But you will always have to forgive him because we only have one rat. So you have to handle him thriftily. You have to be thrifty. You can't spend your only subject." But the little prince decides he can judge himself wherever, so he's going to leave. So he tells the king he's leaving, and the king refuses to order him to go, but he does make him his ambassador. "I make you my ambassador," he says to the little prince as he's leaving. And the little prince left thinking, grown-ups are very strange. That's it for tonight. Next week is Thanksgiving in the United States. It's a really big holiday, and we have guests. About 20 people will be in our house. And our guests often stay for 4 days. So we will not have class next week, but I'll see you again the following week with another installment. See you then.